I do.
So what were you going to do? Which, again, which I, of course, did earlier also. Let you talk about the symposium. I think
Yeah,
that will make sense. What I'll do is let me put up the picture of
please.
all the speakers, because now this is final. We've got, otherwise, what is always tentative. Otherwise, people are coming in and it keeps
Yeah,
growing. So now we've only got 31. I mean, of course, that's very
only.
unlike my events. But I think or am I getting older from 97?
Oh,
Yeah, I
I
could.
think it's the time of the year, right?
No, I think the issue is that I decided I'm not going to extend this. Otherwise, I extend them. But
Yeah,
the other one next month is really important, and you have to be part of that: colonization, decolonization, and mediation.
that'd
So,
be
Sarah,
interesting too. Gosh. I'm going through and looking at the list of people on your little symposium flyer here. And I'm really grateful for hi to everyone who's joining us. My name is Sarah Blake, and I'm so privileged to be joining Vikram here for his International Symposium on Indigenous People and Mediation. This is a really, really important issue, and it's something I'm really passionate about. So it's been interesting that I've really struggled to make it this time round with the best of intentions, and life has got in the way. So I'm just looking at some of the people that have joined you from Australia, whom I all know and have worked with along the way. So I'm really pleased about that. And so I think this is, again, another starting point of a conversation. If you work in the cross-cultural space, if you're an Indigenous peacemaker, it's really important that we listen to your voices and we hear your stories. And the world needs us all to be listening to this lesson. So thank you, Vikram, for providing this opportunity.
thank you, Sarah. Nice introduction. And of course, my posts have the schedule. My website, mediatorvikram.com, has the schedule. So all the YouTube links, recordings are available. So of course, what I'm thinking of doing now is also putting them on the podcast. Let me
Great
put out
idea.
I think a lot of people might not be able to watch it, but they can listen to it. So
Yeah.
I think I'll start putting these things out on the podcast also. So perfect.
Yeah, brilliant.
So Sarah, it's you. About
You
you.
and me, we're going to talk. All right. So, who's this non Indigenous woman talking about Indigenous mediation and peacemaking? I really want to be really upfront about who I am and why I do this work. I'm a non Indigenous woman from Australia. I grew up from a family that lived in the country. My father was a barrister, and both families were farming families. So, my grandparents worked really hard to provide opportunities to their kids, who in turn have provided me with these opportunities. One of the interesting things about my family on both sides, parent side, is both of them had a real passion for community. They had a real passion for lifting up community and stepping in and helping out. And they did it in different ways. My father's side of the family was much more politically active, whereas my mum's side of the family were grassroots, getting in there and helping people in the immediate sense. And so I kind of represent a combination of those things. For me, it was always about being open to the richness and diversity of life. Coming from the country, and particularly my mum's family, we spent a lot of time out in the bush. We spent a lot of time helping out with the farm. We spent a lot of time watching nature and walking country with my pop. And so I learned a real appreciation for space. And I also learned an appreciation for family and the stories that make us who we are. Fast forward a little bit, and my father, as a barrister, was heavily involved in social justice issues, particularly finding in a roundabout way around very big community projects. So my father was involved in Ash Wednesday bushfire event in South Australia, which was a really big fire back in the day, and he was involved in the case, and it was a really complex case around who was at fault, but also how to compensate those impacted. So it was seeing him go off and talking to people that had lost their livelihoods. And then he was also involved in community hospitals, political decisions to close country hospitals. So all of this political activization led me to an interest around how do people make decisions together? How do people with really different ideas come together and make decisions? And then I ended up with an interest in native title, particularly around our First Nations people and how they connect with country. That has really transformed my life. And I just want to say I'm based in Perth in Australia. And one of the things that we like to do in Australia is acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we're on. Here in Australia and where I live, we're on border country with the Noongar Whadjuk people, but it's border country. So there's a need for negotiation for First Nations people traditionally in this space. And we acknowledge elders past and present and future and emerging. And we want to acknowledge their connection to country, their law, their gifts that they give to us as a nation. And why we do that in Australia is to recognise and value the importance that Indigenous people have to us as a nation, to this country as a whole, and to the authority that they bring to this space. So I really want to start with that story of how I started on this journey, but how we are too in Australia. I'm a non-Indigenous person, and I'm very conscious of that in the work that I do. And I'm conscious of it in a way that I will never know what it is to be a First Nations people of this country. And I don't hold authority in that space. And I don't ever want to give the impression that I hold authority in that space. I've had some amazing experiences. I've been adopted into a family in northeast Arnhem Land. My Yolngu family is, my Yolngu name, I should say, is Wadingal Damarangi. I'm a Dampapunya clan. I know about this much, which is very, very little, but I know enough to know how to conduct myself. I know enough to know respectful engagement and to make space for the other. And it's in doing that mutual respect, I think, that we work best together in the cross-cultural space. I was thinking about what can I share with you all that is meaningful and useful as a non-Indigenous person talking about Indigenous dispute resolution. And I'm going to do something a little bit different today, Vikram. Can you give me authority to share my screen?
Always, you always have authority. You always have authority.
Because I want to play some music to you all.
Just
as I play this music,
let me warn you, Sarah, that YouTube sometimes puts a copyright claim because there is someone else's music. So that part of it might be an issue. So, and I don't want your session to be removed from YouTube. That's the only little concern.
Yep. So the authority of this piece isn't by big production. I have authority to share this piece of music because it was generated through my participation in a project called the Mile Rom Project. I'm a graduate of this project and I'm going to talk about it more, but I wanted to play this piece so I can play it with legitimacy. And why I'm playing it because, well, we're going to go into the whys very shortly, but I just going to give you a taste of this piece of music. So Vikram, if I just can see if I can get this going.
Yep. Because I'll tell you, this really gets sad when they put a copyright claim next to the video.
Yes.
Then you don't know what to do because you don't want to remove it. And
yeah, I know, difficult. So let me see. I'm just trying to see if I can play that. And share screen. Here we go. Share. Now, can you hear that?
Yep.
And you're not seeing it though, are you? Just hearing it?
But the volume is really low. There's something at the back. I can hear. Or is
How's
it?
That? Is that loud enough?
Now it's better. Now it's better. Nice.
Thank you.
You know what you've done. You've put some interesting thought in my mind, because when what we call folk music in India, this is similar in terms of the flow of it. And
Yeah.
I'm thinking that maybe that's a common thread somewhere, because we're connecting to something very basic, where words are not required, just the tone and the way, the feeling that is the person emoting without words, which connecting without words. I think that's going to be an interesting thing, Sarah. Another study to be done.
Look, I always, when I play that music, it takes me back to that moment. It touches my soul. I've got goosebumps again every time. It's such an emotive thing hearing that. Let me paint you the picture of what that story represents. For over 10 years, I was involved in a project called the Mile Rom Project, which was cross-cultural mediation and leadership, a coming together of Indigenous people from Northeast Arnhem Land in Australia and some leading mediators. And they came together and they thought, hey, there might be something in common around this Western notion of mediation and how Indigenous Australians in Northeast Arnhem Land think about leadership and peacemaking. And so they kind of did an experiment for 10 years to explore that. I was really privileged to be both a student, it was a 4-year program, and a graduate, and then involved in the ongoing nature of making this conversation continue. What you just heard was a piece of music in, I think, I want to say somewhere around 2012-ish. We're coming towards the 10-year mark of the project. And it was sitting around a sandpit in a playground, actually. So there's this big playground around, and they're all sitting around in the sand, and it was Indigenous people and non-Indigenous people. And we'd been through the hard work of listening and working all week. And it was our last day. We're about to leave the site and everyone was going. And these guys all kind of sat down and they pulled out their musical instruments. And you have sitting around the table some incredibly senior Indigenous Yolngu people, some incredibly, some up and coming Yolngu leaders, some playing the guitar was my brother. So you've got your Irish Catholic Australian descent. There was a lady on the violin who was of Asian Australian descent. And they came together. Now, they couldn't all understand each other's language. There was a language barrier. But what they could do was connect on a deep level through music and listening and being. That piece of music was a culmination of a week of investing in relationships, of building trust, of getting to know each other and what matters to each other, of finding a mutual respect in a place that is often fraught with confusion, with judgment, with barriers, and with conflict. And when they came together and sat and just held that space, they created magic. And I feel that every time I hear that piece of music, the magic that's unfolding. And the song is a celebration of everything that they'd been through. It was also a celebration and a hope for the future. Hey, look what we've been through, us mob, Indigenous, non-Indigenous, we've walked this together and look what we've produced. Isn't it powerful when we can sit down and work together with respect and valuing and making space for the strengths of each other? We have the song from the Indigenous mob. We have the violin from the incredibly talented violinists. We've got the guitar, and they're all in the mix, producing a piece of magic which soothes our soul.
Absolutely. I think this is, like I said, this is something to be studied, which I'll also start collecting music from here. And then maybe we'll just have one session, we'll just play music. If you don't have to put it on live, everything doesn't have to go on YouTube. We'll just sit together and play from each part of the world. Let everyone bring this music in and we just play it. And let's see the similarities, how we feel. That'd be very nice.
Yeah.
Good thought. Nice.
Yeah, look, thank you. And it's such a privilege to share that with people. And why I'm sharing that is because I want you to experience for a moment what it is and what's possible when we mutually respect each other. And it doesn't just happen, and it isn't just about words. And we can all carry status and experience, but there's something else about putting our feet in the sand and being vulnerable and holding people through difficult times. And the magic happens when we listen to each other really well, when we discern, when we make decisions, and when we action those decisions. And whether we're Indigenous or non-Indigenous, as peacemakers, I think that's what we're trying to find the scope for. How we work together to make wise decisions.
Absolutely. I think this is something which we have to connect with the way mediation at the basic level, connecting at the basic level, which we've discussed earlier. Let me tell people that Sarah has been part of course, the heart, soul, spirituality thing and the conference. And we've spoken about something, but what I did not like in what you said, Sarah, is sitting around the table. We've given up the table.
Yes, sorry, we have given up the table. Yes.
Under the tree. We're sitting around the tree now.
Under the tree, yes. And that's why I say putting your feet in the sand, right? So I do a lot of remote community work, and it's such a privilege to do it. And it's hard work. And I'm always very conscious, and I always give my clients choice. It's about giving people choice. As a non-Indigenous woman, particularly, I'm very conscious of saying, hey, this is who I am. This is what I bring to the shade, not the table, to the shade under the tree.
Nice.
And I might be the right person to help you with this issue, but I might not be. Let me tell you about me. And I let people make choices in that. And there's a freedom that comes from that too. And so that's where I start with all of the work that I do, because it's particularly as an outsider, I may not be the right person. And this issue might be an internal cultural issue. I have no authority or legitimacy in that space, and I'm really okay with that. And I think it's really important as non-Indigenous practitioners to be alert to those tensions about what you can bring to the table and not forcing your ways on other people, and being alert to the need to negotiate pretty much everything. Because what we want to have is a legitimate process, and it can't be legitimate one way if it disempowers the other way. And sometimes we need to negotiate a way that is kind of a blend of both. Because sometimes these issues are cross-cultural issues in one system of law and another system of law. And we need people that can bridge that space and understand the boundaries of that space. Because what we're doing is helping people through conflict in a way that is constructive and not destructive, and that will look really different for everybody.
Sarah, what you're going to be doing is you're going to take us through your some actual experience on the ground, building it up to the point of discussion in the conference, mediator as leaders and leaders as mediators. You have to take us through the entire...
Take you on a journey.
Yes.
All right. Let me tell you, one of the very first mediation jobs that I did in a remote community, I was young and naive at the time, but I had done, I think, 1 or 2 years of this Maorom project. And I got asked to go out to a community that was experiencing some conflict. I worked for a government department at the time. And so out I chuffed on a little tiny plane to this remote island. And I remember sitting down with some very senior elder men, and I was really, really nervous. So I'm like, who am I to be going out as a non-Indigenous young white woman to be going out to them and saying, hey, I'm a mediator, I can help you. And I remember really wrestling with this initially. And I kind of sucked it up. And I went out, and we got off the plane, and we went out to the bush, and I sat with them under a tree, and I listened, and we introduced ourselves. And I'm still really nervous. And I think to myself, what can I do? What is the most useful contribution I can make right now? And so I named what was going on. I said to them, hey, I'm not sure how much or if I'm the right person to help you. I said, this is what I bring to the table. This is who I am. Am I the right person to be helping you? And it was such a profoundly powerful moment for me personally, but I also think for them. And they gave me, in a sense, the authority to get on with the job. We worked out the details around how we would work together, who was going to support me, because I couldn't do it all on my own. I didn't have cultural authority or knowledge, but we could work with our counterparts. So we found a counterpart to work with me. And so it was such an honor to be able to name those challenges and then get on with the job. And the job was an ongoing one, but I know that we diffused the heat of that particular conflict. And it was such a pivotal moment for me, understanding how, as a non-Indigenous person, I might be useful in this space. I've been really, I've done a lot of work in communities. I think there's one case that stands out for me that would probably be useful for people as well. In remote Aboriginal communities in Australia, often conflict happens and the law might get involved, or there might be big conflicts occur, and it's really hard to get legal advice out in communities. Legal services aren't really funded to get out there all the time. They do the best they can, but it is really hard. This one particular case was regarding, there was a death of a young person, and these communities were fighting about where this boy was going to be buried. So you can imagine that this was a deeply emotive conflict that mattered very deeply to lots of people in lots of different ways. And sadly, in their grief, it had turned into conflict and community versus community conflict. And they couldn't find a way to resolve the details of how we pay our respects and follow culture and deal with this death. And so it was dividing people and dividing families. As I drove out to this community, it was quite a long drive. And I remember, I'm not sure if I've mentioned this before, but anytime I go out to do work on communities, I always take this time to pay my respects to country. And I'm driving up this little dirt road and there's dust everywhere. And I remember paying my respects. And this is kind of along the lines of what I say in general terms. And I say, hey, I'm Sarah. And my job, I've been asked to come up here as a mediator. It's almost like a prayer. And what I say is, help me to be who you need me to be. Help me to hear and say what you need me to say and do. Help me to be present in the way that I'm needed. And so I pay my respects to country. I tell them, why I'm here, and I ask for help. It's a spiritual thing for me, that connection. And I don't know why, it's just something I've always done. So I did that. And then shortly after, I drove through the gates of this community. And as I'm driving, there's a big whirly-whirly. Over here, we call it big whirly-whirly, willy-willy. It's the wind that picks up all the dust and twirls around. And this willy-willy came across in front of me. And it got me thinking, it was a message, right? This willy-willy, when it blows through town, it picks up all the dirt and the dust and the sticks and the rubbish that's all lying around. It picks it up and it blows through everyone. And everyone scrambles to get out of the way. And they are so focused on getting out of the way that they're not listening properly. And then they've got dirt and dust in their eyes, right? And there's things blowing around and you go into survival mode because you're shutting down. And so that's what this willy-willy does. It picks up all the rubbish and it makes that conflict worse. And so that's why, and then it blows out of town. So it's done its job, it blows out, and there's kind of mess and destruction left from this willy-willy conflict. And it really it was a story for me around what conflict does when we don't tend to ourselves and to our communities. And those rubbish are all those emotions and hurt things that get picked up and thrown around and made worse. And it's our job sometimes to calm the wind, and sometimes it's our job to clean up afterwards and help them clean up afterwards. And sometimes it's their job to make sure this doesn't happen again by tending to the things that they need to. So this willy-willy for me was a very clear message. I came into town and I just sat down with one of the families and we had a chat, and doing this work takes time. You can't rush in like a standard Western mediation, sit everyone down at the table and say, let's mediate and sort this out. That's not going to work. They have to know me. They have to trust me. We have to get a feeling for what their needs are and what's going on. So we talked. And we talked and we got to a place where they'd done enough talking. We'd explored the issue as much as we could. It was then time for me to go and talk to the other party. This other party was about a 2.5 hour drive away. So I got in my car and I did the same with that mob. And we had a chat and we did the very same thing. So we're doing a shuttle mediation over communities. There's two things that stand out for me that help them get a good outcome in this case. The first is that when I introduced myself, I told the story of the willy-willy, because that was country talking to me. And what it did is that it created a connection between us. It created meaning. And we can't resolve things if there's no meaning and connection. And so that became a bridge. The other thing I did in this case was I knew that the parties, one of the barriers to decision making for them was not really understanding their rights through the legal system. If we say, let's go to court and sort this out, what is that going to look like? And that's important, particularly in burial issues, because families often get very fixed on this is right, I am right, we're going to do it my way. And when you don't have access to good legal advice to check those realities, it becomes really hard. So I took out a lawyer as my support person. And this lawyer understood mediation really well. And they understood working in communities. So what they were able to do was provide a bit of a kind of reality check for parties around, in general terms, where the law sits with this issue. It wasn't specific advice, so they weren't representing parties. They just gave in general terms. What it did is it helped parties understand a little bit more clearly what their rights were. And when you have more information, you can make better decisions. You know the lay of the land a bit more. Is it worth the fight, or shall we really, really try hard to resolve this right now? There's got to be some incentive for that. So those two things helped me empower the communities to make really good decisions. I'm so proud of that particular case, and more so of the families. It was painful. There were no perfect endings to that dispute, but they resolved it in a way that they could all live with. And what it did is it created a sense of peace and at least a step towards some healing. Why I love this case too is because I did a follow-up about 3 or 4 years thereafter to check in and see how everyone was. And it was so interesting that the family that was living in the other community had since moved back to that one community. And they were neighbours. And this family that was fractured had found a way to come back together again. And they were thriving in their own ways as a family again. And so it's an example for me of, even if I'm a non-Indigenous person, I can still make a difference in this space, but I have to do it in a way that respects culture and respects traditional ways in doing it and helps to create the conditions for good decision-making.
Yes, you're not waiting for me to say anything, because this is, you're going to take us right through. I'm telling you, that journey is
just started. Keep going. All right.
It's just started. It's going to, I think you build it up from there. Build it up to.
All right. So look, so that for me has been a really pivotal influencer on the work that I do. I often find when I go out to community works that there's this thing about, are parties ready for mediation? And sometimes and often in these remote communities that I'm working in, parties want to mediate, but they're just not ready yet. And so sometimes there's work that needs to be done around unpacking the layers of the conflict. Maybe it's around giving them some new skills to think about how we might negotiate or deal with this differently. Sometimes it's really tricky because culture might be strong or culture might be lost. And so there's a real tension around the right way to do things. And we have to unpack that as mediators and help to really listen, sometimes empower and sometimes step back. So some of the work that I'll do in communities when I get called out has taken 2 to 3 years, 4 years plus to get to the point of mediation. And that doesn't mean that I've been involved all that time, but there's been a flare up. And so they get me out and we have a chat and we might do some work. And then I step back, but they're not ready, or it's not the right time for resolution. So we kind of, it's like a ceasefire for now. We temper down the heat of that conflict. And they travel along quite well for a little while. And then something happens and they flare up again. And this time it might be really hot this time, but they're still not quite, they're happy to have a chat and to lay some more seeds for resolution, but they're not quite at the point where we're ready to resolve. Sometimes it will take 2, 3, 4 times to get to the point where, say, we can't keep doing this. We need to resolve this now. And once they reach that point, then we can talk about the process of what does a resolution look like? How do we get there? How do we resolve this longer term? So I think for me, some of the work in communities is as much about conflict management as it is about the process of mediation. How do we support parties where they're at? How do we try to empower them with tools to do it themselves? When is the right time for intervention? And when it gets to that point of intervention, how can we do it in a way that reduces the risk of violence? And so being very alert to those triggers of violence, to cultural protocols, and to really honouring what Indigenous First Nations people need for themselves in a process of mediation and culture. So I guess that's a really quick summary of some of that work that I do. I really love the work of working with a community to design a dispute resolution process that has meaning for them. And I think I see many mediators head out to community and they take this Western model of mediation, double triangle, whatever it is that you use, and they say, hey, let's do some mediation. And the thing is that for me, that's just tick boxing a process. There is no negotiation of meaning in that. What I do is we sit on a veranda, we sit under a tree. I'll talk about the processes I have, and then I'll say, so what about you guys? How do you usually resolve this? You know, what might we do together to help make this happen? There's issues around gender. Do I have authority to work with the women? We might need to get someone else to come and work with the men. We might have to have gender separate sessions that bring us all back together. Who are the right people to have these conversations? There's a lot of drawing in sand to get that process right. Some of the work I'm really proud of is also some communities have had such experiences of poor governance from outsiders. So whether it's from government, whether it's from non-Indigenous people really taking advantage of the power dynamics, the post-colonialisation, the dispossession of people, right? And it disempowers them and has led to an experience where for some, their culture has also been devalued. And so mediators come into this community, let's do this mediation, and they haven't really stopped to say, hey, do you have any processes that you guys usually use that might help you resolve this? Because if you do, is there anything I can do to help you with that? Is a really different power dynamic, right? It's acknowledging and recognizing the strength of the cultures that you work within. In one particular community, when I did that, they said, yeah, we do. Come back again in a bit later, but give us a few months because we got ceremony time coming up. Let's see what we can do. And so I did. That's their choices to navigate this. And they did. They went out and they came back to me months later. And I'm like, how are you guys traveling? And they were just amazing. They had claimed, and in a way, it had reinforced and revalidated their capacity for dispute resolution without the reliance on others. And I couldn't be more prouder of that. And what it then did is it challenged the status quo of governance in their community from a cross-cultural perspective. And that was fantastic. And that was fraught with challenges and conflict because it represented change. But really, this is what it is. This is a business of sharing power and respecting culture. And so that's the privileged work that I do. And I absolutely love the honor of doing it. It's also hard work. There's an emotional cost. Here in many remote communities in Australia, the conditions are third world conditions. And that can be really shocking for people who haven't been out to communities and just expect Australia looks after everyone really well. And it's not the case. And so it's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking to hear stories of abuse. It's heartbreaking to hear stories of kids disengaged with education, of not having access to healthcare, of living in really poor conditions. That hurts my heart. And it's very sad to work in that space. So I think there's we temper the joy with some of that heartbreak. I also know that there's a real need for cross-cultural dispute resolution in really complex matters. Here in Australia, Indigenous people, traditional owners particularly, are in the process of native title, so regaining authority over their lands to make decisions about what can and can't happen on those lands, is requiring them to make very complex commercial decisions. And we don't give them the skills particularly well from a non-Indigenous government perspective. And so it's a really challenging environment for them to navigate intergenerational trauma, to navigate dispossession, cross-cultural clashes internally, let alone externally, to navigate complex decision-making in a Western space and having to administer and respect and honour their traditional laws and culture. It's a really complex space, right? I can't even begin. My kids are about to walk in the front door. So let me pause just for a second, Vikram, while I sort them out.
I just put up the picture of the
Thank you.
Not a problem at all. So you can go down to mediatorvikram.com and you're back. Sarah?
We're back. Kids are organized.
I just put the website up there where you can find the link to the schedule. So down here in the schedule of activities, just go to show more, and here we have the link to the symposium, because this gives everything there. So that's my job done. Yeah.
My job done too, right? The kids are happy. So, you know, this cross-cultural space is really complex. I think it's really complex too, that what I've observed over probably the last 18 months, particularly emerging from the Black Lives Matter from the US issue, is a real upsurge and empowerment of Indigenous and First Nations people in Australia. And that's really exciting, but it's also quite a tumultuous time as people reclaim their power, I think, and it means others need to give up. I'm very conscious as a non-Indigenous person that right now it's really about making space for Indigenous people to do this work. And sometimes that means I'm not doing the work, and I'm really okay with that, because I would rather Indigenous people be given the opportunities in their space. But I am conscious too that a lot of this is a cross-cultural issue. So we need people that can bridge from both sides, that some of these particularly native title cases and increasingly corporate negotiations between mining companies and Indigenous people, that's a cross-cultural issue. So we need people that can help non-Indigenous people engage more effectively and Indigenous people engage more effectively in this space. So we need people that can together create something unique for each situation. Now, that's a really particular skill set to be able to do that. And I think that requires us with mutual respect working together. And it is hard work. It doesn't just happen. And I think we all make mistakes along the line, and it's about the trust that we've fostered so that when mistakes do happen, they don't completely derail the engagements that we manage. So that's one of the trends that I see happening. I certainly know one of the other interesting conversations is around sustainability of agreements, particularly we see these very complex agreements come out in the native title space, and then something happens and those agreements start to waver. That a factional group might form within the representatives of the Indigenous communities that undermine this other group that had agreed. And so what it's doing is really creating more barriers to good outcomes. And so there's questions around, so what does legitimate decision-making look like? Who are the right people to make these decisions. And does that authority extend over a long time? Is it only a short term? Is that authority only related to this issue? Is it a gender issue? Is it a more broader issue? So there's lots of complexities that, as practitioners in this space, we need to be alert to and asking questions for. Because I think it's so damaging when those sort of things happen, because it delegitimizes the process of mediation and peacemaking, not always through the fault of the practitioner themselves, but through a whole pile of other factors. And that's where the element of conflict management comes into this work. I think as practitioners, we've got to be alert to, particularly in the cross-cultural space, conflict doesn't happen in isolation. Conflict happens as part of a broader story. Now, the mediation might be relating to the negotiation of a contract, for instance, but we can't separate necessarily issues of health and employment and historical conflicts and culture issues. They are all influencing factors in what is often high conflict spaces. So I think that as practitioners, Indigenous or non-Indigenous, we need to be able to unpack to some extent those challenges. We need to be alert to those challenges and also frame them when we need to. One of the tools I use when I'm doing some of this work and I hear one of those bigger issues impacting on the mediation right now is we'll acknowledge it. We'll say, hey, it sounds like you're talking about what happened 3 weeks ago between so-and-so's family. I can hear that that's a really important issue. How about we put it on the whiteboard so that we know we come back to it and we can work out who the right person is to deal with that issue once we've done this work. So what it does is it acknowledges the complexities, but puts a frame around it, pauses it for now so we can focus on what we need to be focusing on. So that's some of the little, I guess, tricks of the trade that I use as I'm doing this work. I could talk till the cows come home about this business of cross-cultural dispute resolution. And even though I've been doing it for a long time, Vikram, I'm really grateful for some of the people that have spoken, and I'm going back to watch them because there's so much to learn. This is a lifelong journey. And I think the more we talk, the better we get at listening. And when we listen really well, we're better at putting into action.
Absolutely. So what's going to happen is that basically, of course, this is the start of a conversation. So you've heard about that World Mediation Circle that I'm putting together. So in that, there's supposed to be, I'm trying to put together a network of circles. So one is going to be a World Indigenous Peoples Mediation Circle. So we'll get everyone together. We have people here. There are lots of other people who are not here. And of course, there are lots of them out there. Let's get everyone in on a global level. Let's have our discussions, share ideas, practices, and everything. And over time, is there something basic that's coming out? Is there something that we can say? Giselle from Peru was there and she used the terminology original dispute resolution. I like that. So is there something so basic which touches everyone and can be looked at as, I don't like the word models, but for a moment I'll use that word model. So that's going to be the next step from here. The other thing is going to be that we are going to use the terminology aspect we are going to work on, like the tree, the mediation tree. Similarly, you move away from parties and move to participants. So let's try to ease out the whole thing. Let's not people think it is some, of course, like we keep saying, it's a collaborative process. It's not adversarial. So that part. The other thing, the mining projects part that you said, we've had a good example coming in from Luis on his case study of his actual in Ecuador. He worked on one and everything. He took us through the entire all the steps there. So I think that mining project work under this banner, we can do it under that or whatever. That's an important area which is required all over the world. So I think very good things are coming up, and sustainability of agreements, definitely getting everyone involved. Whom do you get involved? Who is there, but you don't know, which will come out from Luis's example, where this person who wasn't taken into the whole discussion earlier, and it was not going anywhere. That person came in, found out he actually in a way drove the process in the right direction, and it happened. So you have to keep your eyes and ears and everything open, and you just have to find the right person. So I think those are important things which are coming out, and lots more. So I don't know whether you've actually, how many have you watched? If you want to, are you coming in the evening for the closing address?
I'm going to try. If my kids go down well, I will.
Otherwise, you can, if you want, just some basics you want to talk about here, so that we have at least your thoughts on this. Anything that you can, as learnings and key takeaways, do you want to put anything there?
Now you're putting me on the spot. What do I, key takeaways?
What's new about that, Sarah? First of all, what's new about that? Putting you on the spot, putting people on the spot is what I do.
Look, I think I love that. I really like the notion of language. I'm really interested in language and creating almost like a common dictionary, where we can exchange our ideas and share the language. Certainly, that's a lot of what we did in Arnhem Land, was, really unpacking the words and what do they mean, and are they the right words? Because the words create those bridges, and it's such a wonderful thing, right, when we can use words from other cultures that represent this business that we do. And so I'm really excited about that notion of language, and then the discipline that comes with putting it into practice. So I think that for me is probably an area that resonates particularly, just because it's a pet interest of mine. But I'm just loving the stories and the case examples that people are sharing, because that becomes practical and useful for people as well. So, I think that's probably the highlights for me.
Yeah, because I think that aspect is actually someone working on the ground, and it's not something which is going to happen in days.
Yeah.
It's that those years which it takes to actually, there was Badhu from Australia in that community that he worked on, from violence, and how slowly things got into order, and how it's an actually on the ground experience is those are what we need. So because and from there, if there is some theory that has to come out, I'm sure you people are good at that. I am a practical person. I like the whole working on the ground aspect of it. So I think
what I love, Vikram, is, and it goes back to that piece of music, right? For me, that music stirs my soul, and that's what I would love for us as practitioners in this space. But more generally, I think that's what we can learn from some of our incredible Indigenous peacemakers, is bringing our spirit, bringing our humanity, the thing that connects all of us together, bringing that to the table. That is what binds us, and reminding each of us that connection is deeply real, deeply powerful, and deeply transformative.
Yeah. Let me, at least without, I might forget, Sarah has come on various of my events. So please go to YouTube, search for Mediator Vikram, Sarah Blake, and you'll find a lot of, of course, the last symposium on mediation in our culture and traditions, and of course, heart, soul, spirituality and mediation, and the conference. So is there anything in terms of any highlights of those that you want to bring out? Because heart, soul, spirituality being an important aspect in Indigenous people, and that connection from there.
I've loved that, Vikram. I've really, for me, the space you've created and the conversations you've created around the heart, soul and spirituality, what I would love to see is this become more mainstream in a way, because this is that humanity, right? And it doesn't happen until we talk about it. So you're making it and celebrating the conversation and the spirituality and the soul that is connected to what we do. And so I would be, my aspiration really is that as practitioners across the globe, whether in commercial, corporate, community, whatever space that we work in, when we bring humans back into the room, we are talking about our spirituality, our soul and our heart. And that helps everybody, no matter your status, your background, how much money you have or you don't have. That connects us, and that's what makes lasting agreements.
Absolutely. Yesterday's session with David Naganosh was really nice. He actually spoke about spirituality quite a bit, So that's something you must watch. You must watch all of them. I mean, I'm not saying anything. I'm saying you must watch all of them. But
I watched that one in particular. Yeah,
it was yesterday's
top of the list, right?
Because I'm telling you that part of it is what I keep talking about.
Yes.
And when I hear that from someone else, it's always nice to know that other people are thinking the same thing. That's what the idea behind the conversations is.
Yeah. So thank you for facilitating this and making it happen. I'm very grateful, and I know that there's people across the globe that you never hear about, but I know that they're watching and learning, and you're doing such a big piece for that. So thank you.
Sarah, conversations happen because other people are there. So because you people are here, part of the conversation, so they happen. So that's really important. So thank you for that. And of course, one part which you have to always also take us through is that what we discussed in the conference, that mediators as leaders and leaders as mediators, because in the heart soul spirituality, you did speak about this aspect. So something from that, if you want to just
put that
out.
Look, that's really relevant to me. I think that as mediators, we forget that we have so much skills, so many skills that are so critical to the world right now. And we often take a back step. We've got so used to just providing a mediation service, letting people come to us. They know what we do. I want to encourage all of you as practitioners to kind of step up to the, I want to say table, but it's not. I want you to step into the space of humanity. I want you to step up in a way that helps people understand conflict, not as something to be feared of, but something that can be useful to transform us into a better future. As mediators, we have the potential, one, to help people understand conflict better, but we also need to temper that by the language we use. We forget that we have such assumed knowledge and experience, but most people don't. They can't relate to what we do. They don't really understand mediation, let alone conflict. As leaders, we can step up and make it okay to have the hard conversations. And wise decision-making doesn't happen without that. So we need people to step into those conversations to guide them productively, with confidence and with a calm clarity. That's what leadership for me is about. That's what we as mediators have the potential to influence. It doesn't have to be big. It doesn't have to be on TV. It can be done in our own backyards, in our own communities, in our own workplaces. It can be done on the boards that we volunteer for. It can be done in corporate spaces. It's about having the courage to use your voice more as a leader and less as an enabler.
Yeah, because I think this aspect of that World Mediation Circle is that finally another role that I've now been able to understand is that actually getting communities together. Because if you do talk about things happening at the community level, I think that is breaking up over time, which is what you learn from the indigenous peoples, that how that community is important. Yesterday we had a session with Prem. He's from Nepal. Of course, right now he stays in Thailand. But because luckily, I mean, it was very interesting. So he's from Nepal, living in Thailand, and both the countries really did not get affected by colonization. So he spoke about he's also from an indigenous community, the Tharus in Nepal. And he said there is total consensus building there. So that's important. And you're looking at the time. I think you need to cut off at this time. I can understand. So thank you very much. Please drop in the evening. It's always a pleasure speaking to you. And there's lots to do. So thank you very much.
Thank you. See you later.